The lecture hall of the Galactic Pedagogical Institute stretched 3 stories high, its crystalline walls refracting the light of distant stars. Professor Velthar, a distinguished Craxian scholar with 6 optical sensors and a reputation spanning 40 systems, stood at the podium addressing the most elite gathering of academic minds in known space. "And now," Velthar announced, his translator rendering his chittering speech into perfect galactic standard, "we arrive at the theoretical question that has occupied our greatest minds for millennia." The audience, comprised of professors, researchers, and doctoral candidates from 63 different species, leaned forward in anticipation. This was the climax of the 3-day symposium on advanced theoretical physics. Velthar's central eye gleamed as he projected the equation across the holographic display. The impossibility paradox. How would a species achieve faster-than-light travel without access to quantum-fold technology, dimensional phasing, or pre-existing wormhole networks? A respectful silence filled the auditorium. This was the galaxy's oldest unsolved problem, a thought experiment considered so fundamentally impossible that it had become the academic equivalent of asking how to create energy from nothing. "Of course," Velthar continued, his voice carrying a note of academic superiority, "this remains purely theoretical. No species has ever achieved FTL without first developing quantum fold capabilities through centuries of research and chemical propulsion." The voice was soft, almost hesitant, coming from the back corner of the auditorium. Every optical sensor, auditory receptor, and sensory organ in the room oriented toward its source. A human sat there. Sarah Chen, a visiting scholar from Earth, looked almost embarrassed to have spoken. She was one of only 3 humans in attendance, her species having joined the galactic community a mere 15 standard cycles ago, which in galactic terms was yesterday. Velthar's mandibles clicked in what his species used as polite confusion. I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Sarah stood, her notebook clutched in her hands. "Chemical propulsion, sir. You'd use controlled explosions to achieve thrust. Layer rocket stages, calculate trajectories, and use gravitational assists from planetary bodies. It's not elegant, but it works." The silence that followed was absolute. Professor Anthala, a gaseous Vexatorian whose species had achieved spaceflight 6 million years ago, rippled with what could only be described as shock. You're describing a kinetic launch system, using combustion. That's Bronze Age technology." "Well, yes," Sarah admitted, her cheeks coloring slightly. "But you asked how to achieve FTL travel without quantum fold technology. Humans did it that way. We reached our moon using chemical rockets in 1969. We sent probes out of our solar system decades later, and we achieved our first FTL jump in 2157 using an enhanced ion drive combined with a risky gravitational slingshot maneuver around our sun." The auditorium erupted. "Impossible," shrieked a Paltharian researcher, her feathers standing on end. "The energy requirements alone—" "The radiation exposure," began a Zenthian physician. The sheer waste, multiple voices overlapped. Velthar raised all 6 of his manipulator appendages for silence. When order was restored, he fixed Sarah with all 6 of his eyes. "Miss Chen, are you telling this assembly that your species achieved spaceflight, left your planet, and accomplished faster-than-light travel using explosions?" "Controlled explosions," Sarah corrected gently. "And yes, sir, we didn't have any other choice. We couldn't wait for quantum fold technology, because we didn't know it existed. We just did what we could with what we had." Professor Catharn, a crystalline lithoid whose species took 15,000 years to achieve spaceflight, spoke in a tone of horrified fascination. "How many of your people died in these attempts?" Sarah's expression grew somber. "Many, especially in the early days. The Apollo 1 fire killed 3 astronauts before we even reached the moon. The Challenger disaster killed 7. Columbia killed another 7. And the first FTL attempt, we lost an entire crew of 16 when the drive core destabilized." "And you," continued. The question came from a Harmonious, a species so risk-averse they had taken millennia to achieve orbital flight. "Of course," Sarah said, seeming genuinely confused by the question. The goal was important. They knew the risks. We honored them by pushing forward. Velthar sat down slowly, his legs no longer able to support his weight. His mind was racing through calculations. "Your species achieved FTL in—" He checked his data slate. approximately 200 of your years after achieving basic flight. A little less, actually. The Wright brothers flew in 1903. We hit FTL in 2157, so 254 years. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The Craxians had taken 40,000 years. The Vextorians even longer. Most species required tens of thousands of years of technological development, careful planning, and multiple evolutionary adaptations to achieve what humans had done in 2.5 centuries. But why? Asked Professor Yilmara, a philosophical Sireni. Why such haste? Why such risk? Sarah smiled. And in that smile was something that made every being in that room feel a chill of recognition, a glimpse of something primal and unstoppable. Because we looked up at the stars, she said softly, and they looked back. Because every human who ever lived wondered what was out there. Because we're curious, reckless, and maybe a little bit crazy. Because someone once asked, why climb the mountain? And the only answer that made sense was, because it's there. She paused, looking around the room at beings who represented billions of years of collective evolution and carefully planned progress. We're not the oldest species. We're not the wisest. We don't have the best technology or the longest lifespan, but we have something that apparently makes us unique. We don't know how to wait for permission to reach for impossible things. We just reach, and sometimes we actually touch them. The lecture hall remained silent as Sarah sat back down. Professor Velthar looked at his carefully prepared lecture notes, theories and proofs that had taken him 3 decades to compile, and slowly pushed them aside. I believe, he said quietly, that we have learned more in these last few minutes than in the previous 3 days of our symposium. He looked directly at Sarah. The question was theoretical. We never imagined anyone had actually solved it through sheer audacity. As the session ended and the attendees filed out, they carried with them a new understanding. Humanity hadn't joined the galactic community because they had been invited. They had clawed their way to the stars on pillars of fire and determination, refusing to accept that the impossible was anything more than the not yet achieved. And in academic circles across the galaxy, a new field of study emerged, human methodologies. Because sometimes the most sophisticated answer to an impossible question was the simplest one. Sometimes you just had to light a fire and see how far it could take you, even if the destination was the stars themselves.